Hey, what do we got here?
A whole lot of silver.
I've never seen you get up from your desk. Wow, that is a boatload of silver you have right there. Where did you get all this stuff?
And I held on to it, and here I am today.
So what do you got? Most people don't realize until 1964, all U.S. dimes, quarters, half dollars, silver dollars were all made out of silver. After the discovery of the New World, when they found him today, you see copper and nickel. Pre-6 is silver. He bought right at the bottom of the market. Television, they all started needing silver. By, I think it was last year, I hear that there's basically this much money. There's too much temptation to put a bar of steel or something on pure silver.
Can we test it?
Okay. First off, you have to drill deep enough to make sure there's not a lead core. But I have to factor in the unusual cost when trying to sell something so heavy and odd-shaped. You got $46,000 for the $110,901. I can do $111,000.
Welcome to Pimpy's Investment Chat, where we keep investment talk simple. And here's your host, Pimpy.
What is going on out there, peeps? All right, I just want to do a quick update. Watching gold and silver take off today. Just want to remind you, make sure you guys start buying your silver now before it's too late. Let me show you so you can see what I'm talking about. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button. If you're not a subscriber, please do so, because when you do, it helps out the channel, and I certainly do appreciate it. If you're thinking about buying gold and silver, head on over to our friends at Miles Franklin. The link will be down below in the description. When you make your purchase, make sure you use promo code Pimpy, P-I-M-P-Y, and they'll take care of you. If you have any additional questions, you can reach us over here at this phone number or over here at this particular email. For all orders over $10,000, reach out by email and we'll make sure that you get a great deal. So come on over to Miles Franklin and add to your precious metal inventory. You ever get a feeling that somebody knows something that we don't know? Silver revaluation? This popped up on the debt clock, not today, but a couple weeks ago. Yeah, that's a real silver skull. That's awesome. All right, since this morning, take a look at cryptos. Look at Bitcoin, up $4,400. Bitcoin at $65,962. Ethereum over $3,000 at $3,017. Solana jumped up to $156.40. XRP jumped up from 50 to, well, almost 52 cents. Dogecoin's at 15 cents. Cardano's at 45 cents. Polkadot's at $6.97. Chainlink's at $13.85. Polygon is at 68 cents. Litecoin at $82.43. Terra Luna Classic at 30109. Sata Chain, having a good day at 0.001138. And here you go, it is now at $2,391.80. It is up $31.90 on the day. Silver knocking on the door of $30, sitting at $29.92. It is up $1.22 since earlier today. Now that clip of Rick from the Pawn Stars talking about the silver, man, you should have seen my face when he announced that. When this guy bought into it, silver was only $3 an ounce. Nice. That's not going to happen again. I'm waiting for silver to pass that 30 resistance mark and stay above it. And then from there, you're going to really start to see it take off. I think people are smart and they're starting to move into safe havens. They don't like all the news they're hearing about the banks, people being forced into the central bank digital currency, the unpayable debt that's out there, and watching the Democrats actually destroy the US dollar. So let's take a listen to what Taylor has to say from ITM. Usually I'm used to seeing Lynette Zhang here. Unfortunately, she's no longer there. But the United States has some debt coming due. What happens when we don't pay it? We turn into Venezuela. Let's listen in.
Can U.S. banks survive interest rates staying higher for longer? Banks are sitting on over $400 billion of unrealized losses, so no rate cuts this year could result in the largest banking crisis we've ever experienced. Multiple banks have already failed following last year's high interest rates, impacting their balance sheets and leaving banks with a lack of available capital. Following these failures, we were all promised multiple rate cuts to the tune of 6 this year alone, But back in February, I actually predicted that we would see higher for longer, and not because of inflation, which we thought would persist, but because of the amount of government debt maturing this year. And the only way to avoid a crisis is to keep interest rates up. But before we get into that $8.9 trillion worth of government debt maturing, it's important to first understand just how vulnerable the banks really are. Following the explosion of the money supply in 2020, banks were faced with an abundance of cash deposits and nowhere to invest them. This resulted in banks buying up government debt in record numbers, tying up most of their available capital in long-term treasury bonds.
There should be a law that each bank must hold X amount of gold as protection against all the debt they incur.
Those bonds might have looked like a safe bet at the time, but right after banks bought them, interest rates rose, bond prices declined, and therefore banks were left with massive amounts of unrealized losses. In other words, the price they paid for the bonds versus the price that they could currently sell them at would come at a loss. The reason these losses are unrealized is because technically, if they don't sell the bonds, then they're not losing money. But we all know that if you need liquidity and you're forced to sell something, those unrealized losses become realized very quickly. And this is exactly what's happening with the bank's holdings of bonds as well as commercial real estate loans, with 13% of large banks' balance sheets being comprised of commercial real estate loans and almost 44% of regional banks' balance sheets being tied up in commercial real estate. With asset values already down thanks to a decline in demand for office space, owners are struggling to refinance these loans at current rates. The bank's answer so far to avoid any losses has been to push out refinancing and delay as long as possible. But we all know you can't extend and pretend forever. And none of this even takes into consideration the amount of derivative exposure that these banks have. But just focusing on the unrealized losses, we know that they are in significant trouble.
I spoke about this. The Federal Reserve is insolvent. They're bankrupt.
Against this backdrop, that we then look at the United States government and the debt maturities that are coming this year. $8.9 trillion of government debt is set to mature this year, plus the $1.1 trillion of current deficit spending and whatever other deficit spending happens this year. I think we're on track to hit $2 trillion, so let's just call it an even $11 trillion worth of debt that's owed. When government debt matures, they have two options. Option one, find the resources to pay off the debt. Option two is to roll over the debt or to issue new debt at the current rates. Obviously, the debt is not going to be repaid. So that leaves us with option two, rolling over the debt. Now, on its face, it might seem like it would make sense to actually have lower interest rates, because if the government has to finance $11 trillion of debt, you would want a lower interest rate because it would mean that it would be less expensive to pay it off. But that's not taking into consideration the way that the government finances its debt, which is through the sale of bonds. Now, stay with me here. Interest rates and bond prices operate on a seesaw. As interest rates rise, bond prices fall, which is exactly why the banks have all these unrealized losses. Interest rates rose, and the bonds they'd already bought were worth less. New bonds in the market when interest rates are high are actually worth more. Now, for some context, the U.S. Treasury market, the way that the U.S. finances its debt, is struggling right now. Demand for these bonds, demand for U.S. debt, has been declining, which is especially alarming given the fact that interest rates are high and therefore bonds are more favorable. The largest foreign holders and buyers of U.S. bonds are actively moving away from U.S. debt for a variety of reasons, whether it's the weaponization of the U.S. dollar, fears around United States sanctions. It could be new geopolitical alliances such as the BRICS bloc, or the United States' sound economic mind has been called into question after downgrades and bank failures. And on top of that, this is all happening at the same time that the Federal Reserve is reducing their balance sheet by $1.5 trillion. All of this to say, with $11 trillion worth of debt for sale, who is going to buy it? With demand as low as it is, who is going to buy it? Someone has to, because the alternative is that the United States government defaults, and at that point there would be a complete collapse. The only way I see this working is by continuing to keep rates high in order to make bonds more favorable. This is exactly what I said would happen a couple of months ago. But the kicker is, while we might avoid a catastrophe like the one I just outlined, if the United States government were to default on its debt, what happens to the banks? The same banks who have been holding their breath, waiting for a rate cut while they sit on hundreds of billions of dollars of unrealized losses. And should they need any liquidity, they can't afford to sell their bonds at a loss. What happens to them is what I want to know, because that's where our cash is stored. And if they don't have liquidity and too many people try and make a withdrawal, what happens? Well, last week, a U.S. Treasury buyback program was announced, the first of its kind in over 20 years, which will allow the Treasury to buy back billions of dollars worth of securities in order to allow more liquidity. Now, I have thoughts on what this is and what it means. Some people out there are calling it quantitative easing or a bank bailout by another name. Some are saying that it's clear-cut and neither of those things. What do you think it is? Let me know in the comments below.
Well, it can't be a bailout because they made it illegal for banks to be bailed out with taxpayer dollars. So they created bail-ins. That's when they take the money that you have in your bank. That's when they take your 401ks, your IRAs, things like that. And they're going to say it's for the betterment of the country. That's why you better be holding on to precious metals. Or if anything, take your money out of the bank and keep it somewhere safe, just as long as it can't be confiscated. Now, the other thing you have to be asking yourself is, with all this trouble that we're having with debt, why did the Democrats allow so many illegals to come over the border and put a heavier burden on costs for American citizens? Why the hell would they raise minimum wage up to $20 an hour? Those are just a couple of things that the Democrats have done that helped contribute to the situation that we are in. They are burdening us with more debt that we can't afford. And they're going to tell you, well, it's for humanitarian reasons. Well, that step pretty much could have bankrupted the whole country. Make sure you have gold and silver. I can't stress this enough. And if you're thinking about buying gold and silver, head over to Miles Franklin and tell them Pimpy sent you. Anyways, that's it. I look forward to your comments, and I'll get back at you later. I'm out.